will show the world what the ultimate bioweapon looks like when I let loose Mike the Birdman and the rest of the TWIG crew upon Chris Redfield and his unnervingly hot little sister. Oh. Oh, yes. Right here on this weekingeek.net.
Who disrupts my coronation?
Everyone has been destroyed because of this freak. I won't allow it! These babies just saved this lame death party!
I've got an experiment for you. Safety glasses on.
See, you can't just reboot a franchise from scratch anymore. The fans won't stand for it. Black Christmas, Child's Play, Flatliners, that shit doesn't work. But you can't just do a straight sequel either. You gotta build something new, but not too new, or the internet goes bug fucking nuts. It's gotta be part of an ongoing storyline, even if the story shouldn't have been ongoing in the first place. New main characters, yes, but supported by and related to legacy characters. Not quite a reboot, not quite a sequel, like the new Halloween, Saw, Terminator, Jurassic Park, Ghostbusters, fuck, even Star Wars. It always goes back to the original.
A reboot, boys, is when Hollywood wants to make a lot of money without the hassle of creating a new movie. So they take an old movie and change just enough to make you pay for the same shit all over again.
Those greedy fucking animals.
Oh, it's insidious. They take a flick you loved as a kid and add youth and diversity to it. For example, name the movie where a robot has secret plans that could help the good guys beat the bad guys and their leader in a black mask by blowing up a giant ray gun in space.
Star Wars.
No, The Force Awakens. See, now that's what you call a reboot. Nung.
Number one, the body count is always bigger. Number two, the death scenes are always much more elaborate. More blood, more gore. Carnage, candy. Your core audience just expects it. And number three, if you want your sequel to become a franchise, never, ever...
How do we find the killer, Randy? That's what I want to know.
Oh, let's look at the suspects.
And now, our feature presentation.
That's right, Mr. Peabody.
Quiet, you.
Hey guys, what's going on? You are listening to ThisWeekinGeek.net's Halloween special. I'm one of your horror movie hosts tonight. I am Mike the Birdman, but I'm not alone in this annual Halloween tradition, as I have two titans of horror with me that I love to collaborate with each and every Halloween season. My good friend from the Paris of Ohio and host of Do You Even Movie and the most handsome man on the internet.
It's true.
He's got better glasses than me.
Yeah, those are pimp glasses. I love them.
Thank you.
So that is Henrique Couto, host of Do You Even Movie Weekly Spooky, which one of my stories was just on there recently. And the last time we had Hen on the show, he was hosting Welcome to Prime Time, a Freddy's Nightmares podcast, which has now come to its conclusion, but there's now a book published as well if you want to check that out, which I think you can still get print copies and definitely digital copies from, what is it, Death Cult Press, is it?
Yeah, Death Cult Press or Amazon.
Fantastic. And of course, welcoming back to the show, the original, the OG YouTuber, and I've worked with James since all the way, I want to say 2008, we started talking, but we've been friends all the way since then. Holy shit. Welcome back, James Rolfe, aka the Angry Video Game Nerd.
Oh, hey, thanks so much.
Yo, it is always good to talk horror with three people who really get the genre, who've made movies in the genre, and just really understand what it takes to make a bucket of blood entertaining. And honestly, in the horror movie genre, we've been eating pretty good this last year. I know in theaters right now, Art the Clown is somehow beating the ever living shit out of Arthur Fleck, aka the Joker, which I still hate that movie.
Yeah, I know.
It's like slamming your dick in a car door for 2 hours.
You're talking about the sequel, right? The
Oh
one that
my
just came
God,
out.
yeah.
Oh my God. Let's not dwell on that, but I mean, there were some good things. It was like almost awesome at times, but because I loved the first Joker, I absolutely loved it, and this one I think they really missed an opportunity here. But hey, we got other stuff to talk about. So.
Exactly. Yeah, it is going to be one of those movies that'll be talked about on movie podcasts for quite some time. I think it comes out on digital at the end of this month, so yikes. And then it comes out on physical media, I want to say in the middle of Christmas time. So a turd that'll be under your Christmas tree, I'm sure, this holiday season. So in this edition of the Twig Horror Movie Specials, I invited these two on to talk about something that I think's kind of good. As I mentioned, we're eating really good in the horror movie filmmaking area. And one of the areas where I think things have gone pretty good in the last couple of years is horror movie remakes. Now, sometimes these things hit really fantastic, and other times they don't. And I'm looking right in your way. The Crow reboot from 2024. I'm sure Henrique's co-host David Denoyer would have something to say about this, but we'll find about that on our other podcast, Loose Cannon, in just a couple of weeks. So yeah, horror movies are one of those things that if you remake it, sometimes you get something astounding. You get The Thing, you get The Fly, you get some amazing movies. And other times, you just don't. So this time, I tasked these guys over the last couple of months, pick two movies that you think are really good examples of classics or just other horror movies that have been remade and it actually works. Now, to go around the room, I have picked Hellraiser, the one that premiered exclusively on Hulu in 2022, and I also picked Fede Alvarez's Evil Dead reimagining from 2013. And then, Hen, which two movies did you pick?
I chose Night of the Living Dead 1990, the Tom Savini remake, and Body Snatchers from 1993, directed by Abel Ferrara.
And then, James, which two movies did you pick?
I must apologize. I'm going to go on many tangents tonight, probably. But because I feel like I want to talk about all the ones that I didn't pick. But because I need to, emphasize these are not necessarily our favorite horror remakes ever. Mm-hmm. It's just two that we think are good examples. And I went off the beaten track because, well, I was pretty sure somebody would pick The Thing, The Fly, or The Blob, the 80s. Those were like my first taste of horror remakes. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to pick those because somebody else will.
That's exactly why I didn't pick The Thing. I was like, somebody's going to pick The Thing.
Yeah,
so I'm
right?
going to not even lean that direction.
Yeah. So I went way off the beaten track. I went I'm going to go with like some older remakes because the idea of remake, you usually think of something modern, but the idea of remaking films actually goes back, well, pretty much to the beginning. Even all the silent movies were remade in the 30s, like the first time there was ever sound. But I'm not going back that far. I'm going to go back to the 40s and the 50s. So I got the 1941 version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, starring Spencer Tracy and Ingrid Bergman. And that's a remake of the 1931 or 32. It came out New Year's Eve 31. So it's very close. And then the other one is House of Wax from 1953 with Vincent Price. And that's a remake of the 1933 Mystery of the Wax Museum. So those are the two that I picked. I'm going old school.
Fantastic. All right, so we're going to start things off with one of my picks for the evening. And this, we're going to start with a fairly modern one. We're going to start with the Hellraiser reboot that came out back in 2022. And the main reason I picked this one, because it sits in a very unique position within the Hellraiser mythos. While it doesn't have anything to do with the original Doug Bradley Pinhead, it still brings in enough elements of the mythology of the lore that Clive Barker established with the lament configuration box, the idea of the Cenobites being explorers of experience and pain, and the idea of Leviathan being this dark, evil god. So the idea between the Hellraiser 2022 remake takes the idea of there is a girl, I think her name is Riley, and she is a recovering drug addict, and she met someone during rehab who's not necessarily great for her recovery process, and through a series of, shall we say, unfortunate events, eventually becomes into the possession of the lament configuration box, and it leads her and her friends and family into basically a labyrinth of terror. And the reason I think this one actually works, because I think in a certain way this could actually exist within the original Hellraiser world, like of still having the Doug Bradley Pinhead could still in theory exist in this world, because it's just a different aspect. It doesn't have to be the Elliot Spencer representation of the Cenobite demon. It just has to be a Cenobite who happens to share the pins through the head as its, I guess, eternal punishment or servitude to Leviathan. But it also updates the story, whereas the story of like Christy Cotton, wrong place, wrong time, and eventually wanting to save her Uncle Frank. This one is about a person trying to save themselves. And what I really like about it is when you get the lament configuration, the puzzle box, there are certain things you can ask the puzzle box if it receives flesh and as it receives souls to empower it. Like there's like you get the power of resurrection, which at one point during the movie, I guess I should spoil this, there's going to be some pretty heavy spoilers from this. Her brother dies in the course of her getting the puzzle box. Very much her fault, more or less. And at one point, the Cenobites offer her, well, you can have your brother back. You just have to pick resurrection. But she notices whenever you pick a gift from the Cenobites, well, it's not exactly milk and cookies. And she's like, no, I see what your dark gifts do to people. I see how you twist them. It's very much the monkey's paw. And she's like, my brother's gone and he's not coming back. And Pinhead, the female Pinhead, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, she says, you've chosen the lament configuration. You could have chosen power, majesty, experiences eternal, and yet you chose bitterness, sadness, and loneliness. You've chosen the lament. And they leave. And that's something I didn't expect from a movie on Hulu. This is a guy who did stuff from the VHS franchise. And I was not expecting something to be this well done, to be this thought-provoking. The special effects I thought were fantastic. The kills were really good. And to speak about the special effects, the redesign of Pinhead looks really good. And it's not Douglas Bradley. I was actually thinking about this last night just before I fell asleep. I was thinking, the thing about Douglas Bradley's Pinhead is he projects authority and menace. There's a majesty to him. Whereas the female Pinhead is still those things as well, but there's a subtle sexiness to it. There's a seductive angle to it where, there's something beautiful but deadly about it, like a caged viper. It's pretty, but you don't want to touch it. And there's something about the two portrayals of Pinhead where they could exist in the same universe, and they're both completely separate performances. And I know that the production did reach out to Douglas Bradley saying, hey, do you want to be involved? But he said, well, first off, it's COVID, so no. But second of all, he wanted this Pinhead to stand on their own. And I think it actually worked really, really well. So, guys, what are your thoughts on the Hellraiser reboot from 2022?
Oh, did you want to go first?
Oh, it's your call, man.
I honestly want you to go because this one
Sure.
I have the least to say about. So the one we're starting with is the one I have the least. I was in 2022 when I was doing Monster Madness that month. I did all new movies. I did all basically my idea was watch every new horror movie that came out that month and it picked the ones that I wanted to review, and that ended up not being one I picked. Because I really didn't have much to say about one way or another. And anytime I review a movie, I want to make sure that I can give it my best. And if I can't, then I pick something else. So that was one where I was like, hey, it's pretty decent, but I just didn't have much to really, say. I even went back to my old notes right before this episode, and I was like, well, I don't have anything, so we'll have to move on. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Well,
I went through, 13 probably like 13 Roger Corman movies this month. So I was like, okay, now there's 6 horror remakes. I don't know if I'm going to rewatch any of these. So yeah.
Well, my first thought after watching the 2022 Hellraiser was, I mean, I did enjoy it. I thought it had great production value. I thought it had great performances, great locations and sets, but I was taken aback by how massively sexless a Hellraiser movie was.
Yeah.
Because that first Hellraiser movie and almost all the subsequent ones are extremely perverted. And that's kind of the point. You know, the whole concept of why the puzzle box is open in the first Hellraiser is that literally some deviant miscreant is so enthralled with the idea of even more pain and pleasure that he decides the only way he'll be happy is if he opens a gate to hell and sees demons, basically. So that was my only big complaint with that new Hellraiser was I was just surprised how kind of puritanical it was compared to all the other Hellraisers. It was just very sexless and very kind of, I don't know. That was the part that kind of confused me, because otherwise I think it's a perfectly good movie. And also in the realm of Hellraiser, where you have so many sequels, so many direct-to-video sequels in particular, and so many barely tied in sequels later on, the bar isn't very high for a great Hellraiser movie anymore. I mean, if it makes enough sense and makes you go, ooh, and has a couple good effects, you're probably going to be happy.
Mm-hmm. And I know they are talking about making another sequel to that. I want to say I think the article I saw was from March 2023, said they were definitely interested in pursuing a sequel, but now we're in October of 2024. And is it going to happen? I hope so, because you're right. Like, it was fairly sexless. I mean, they talk around it. They say the guy, Voight, I think was the main bad guy's name, saying, oh, he did all these fucked up things and had sex parties and all sorts of weird shit. But you never get into it. Instead, you see what the Cenobites have done to people, where he's got that clockwork thing in his chest, which, again, is really kind of cool, but it's not, whips, chains, and everything else that makes you go, ooh. Like, it's just, yeah, it's kind of strange. I never quite thought of it like that. And I guess Clive Barker liked it enough that he gave it its, like, kind of blessing. But you're right, with, like, the Hellraiser franchise being, like, at least 9 sequels that I can think of, if not more, the bar is not very high. And honestly, for that series, that's a series where I was hoping like it would have gotten remade sooner, but considering the quality of what we got, I'm glad it took longer than this, because it could have went very much the other way. Because I know there's one of the Hellraiser sequels. It's not meant as a reboot, but there's a very famous meme online where there's Doug Bradley's Hellraiser, and then there's a more, we'll say, portly gentleman playing Pinhead, and it's like the Great Value brand of Pinhead. Whereas I'm glad this way went sexy Pinhead, and it kind of works. And again, to reboot the design of the Cenobites, that's something else too that could have very much gone wrong, because the Cenobites, they're known for weird, bizarre, fucked up makeup and just being done in leather. These ones, they've got like exposed spines. They did a take on the Chatterer, but they didn't do one on Butterball and the other ones. And I know there's one of the Hellraisers where one of the guys looks vaguely like a Borg drone from like Star Trek First Contact, which oddly enough, I think starred Terry Farrell. I think that was number 3. That one was, but anyway, off on a tangent. But yeah, like that's when I thought that worked pretty well, and that was going to be my first pick for tonight's sequel or remake that I think actually gets it done right. So let's jump to Hen. What is your first pick tonight for a sequel that actually works?
It would have to be Tom Savini's 1990 Night of the Living Dead. It's a film that hits so well in so many ways without, and ironically, with the exact same characters as the first film and the exact same setting as the first film, but they're just completely separate in my brain. One is a classic black and white, trudgingly dark and sad horror experience, and the other one is a much more like somewhat 80s influenced modern piece with much more professional actors, but a lower amount of dread, more fun, more excitement, more special effects. They like completely occupy different spaces in my brain. And that's why I love it, because I love the idea that I don't have to think about the original to like the remake, and I don't have to think about the remake when I watch the original. I remember being a young man, maybe 8 or 9 years old, when it would be on television and being scared shitless by it. That's one of my favorite things also, is that it scared me very much as a kid. The bullet shots and shooting the zombies was always freaking me out. And then years and years later, I was out in Pittsburgh, and out of nowhere, my cousin and I were there. He's a Night of the Living Dead original film aficionado, and we were going to locations from Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead. And I said, "Hey, where's the cemetery from the remake of Night?" And he went, "Oh my God, hold on." So he like got on his phone and he was like, "Washington, PA." And we drove 40 minutes straight to that cemetery. So I think that it's one that's well liked and gets a lot of love, and rightfully so. And it got a lot of love, especially when you consider it was before that big deluge of horror remakes that kind of made a lot of people in our age range kind of dread remakes, which was in that 2000 through 2007, 2008 era. There were just so many remakes, one after the other, after the other, after the other. Even if you liked a few of them, you got so burnt out on it. You're like, I'm just old enough that I saw the 1980s one. Now you're giving me another one, and it's with, Korn music and Limp Bizkit on the end credits. I don't know if I like that, But Night of the Living Dead 90 came along very early, late in the 80s horror boom, but very early in the kind of remake boom that was coming. So I think that it just holds true while being its own thing. I love what they did with Barbara, having her be tough and fight back, which you don't expect at all if you love the original. I think there's just a lot of big wins in Night of the Living Dead 1990.
Yeah, the first time I saw Night of the Dead 1990 is when my adoptive parents were stealing satellite, so obviously upstanding citizens. So I saw this on Cinemax on repeat for years, and I think I saw the remake before I saw the original 1968 version. And what stood out to me is how, you're right, characters like Barbara, played by Patricia Stillman, I want to say, or Tallman, just how powerful Barbara was. Now, she wasn't exactly Ripley, but she wasn't taking any shit either. And seeing Tony Todd, now this is pre-Candyman Tony Todd, and just seeing him play that heroic character, for me, I would have been, this is 1990, I was born in 81, so I was like 9-10 years old when I saw this. So I grew up in rural Ontario, so about as white bread as you can possibly get. And to see a heroic person of color, that was really cool for me. I'd never seen that before. I just was never exposed to that. And again, just seeing that wonderful performance and that entire cast. There are very few weak performances in the entire 1990 remake. Like just seeing how everybody's still panicked. Mr. Cooper's still a prick. excuse me, Mr. Cooper's wife is still trying to hold it together, the daughter, and even the two redneck kids, like, again, there's not a weak performance there. And even Barbara, what I liked about the remake is she starts to get a plan together. She's like, they're so slow. We can just walk right past them. What the fuck are we doing? And just, again, that was the first movie I can clearly remember talking about with my friends. Well, what's your zombie plan? And I think that's a movie that doesn't get mentioned enough when people talk about remakes, because you're very right. Like, it's in that weird kind of boom where we hadn't gotten remakes of like Psycho and like, I don't know. Actually, what were some of the big horror movie remakes that came out in that, like, say, 95 to 2005 era? I know there was Texas Chainsaw, Nightmare would come later, same with Friday the 13th, but I don't think we had My Bloody Valentine in there as well.
Dawn of the Dead.
Dawn of the Dead, yeah. Which, to go off on a tangent on that one for 3 seconds, I think that one's actually okay. I kind of like that one more than what I thought I would too, because Dawn 1978, you can't touch it. But to attempt to do a remake that's kind of its own thing while sharing similar things, it works. I'm actually surprised that the remakes of Day have not been as successful, because Day is actually my favorite of the entire, I guess, what the hell would you call the Romero verse? Because it's more than 3 and it's more than 4 if you count Survival and Diary.
Pretty much a franchise, just the dead franchise.
Yeah, the dead franchise there. So, James, what are some of your thoughts on this? Like, what did you think about the 1990s remake? Because I know you're a big Dead guy, and you've been to some of these locations, much like Hen.
Yeah, same kind of thing. Did the Dead locations and all that. Did some videos on that as well, where we did the cemetery and everything. Totally agreed. Barbara was a huge improvement. The original movie, she runs, she trips, she screams, she goes catatonic. The 1990 version improves on that greatly. And George Romero has said he's like apologized years and years and years. He's always tried to like make it up with the subsequent films. And then also Tom Savini, who wanted to direct, he wanted to do the effects on the original actually, and he wasn't available. So they got him to not only do the effects, but to direct this one, which was cool. Tony Todd has been great. I overall really do like this remake. I think it's a pretty solid, remake. The original is untouchable. I think nothing comes close. But the circumstances surrounding how the remake got made is a little weird, because how the original slipped into public domain because they changed the title from a Night of Anubis, which was like an Egyptian god of the dead or something. And when it came close to release, the producers or somebody, one of the higher ups, told them like, "Oh, you can't call it that because nobody's going to know what that means." So they swapped out the title. But in that time, you needed to have the copyright logo and date and everything on the movie somewhere. They had it on the title screen. When they changed the title, they lost the copyright. So it somehow slipped in public domain, which has been like a double-edged sword, because the original movie, even though Romero didn't get the profits from it and everything, still the movie got circulated. Like everybody, so you could see Night of the Living Dead like everywhere. It became like one of the most common movies to have on in the background in another horror movie. Like how many movies can you think of where Night of the Living Dead's on the TV? Like that movie to me is like the background of Halloween. But they made the remake because they thought maybe they could get the copyright back if they made the remake, or at least that somebody else wouldn't remake it if they did, because somebody else would remake it anyway, which has happened. There's many unofficial remakes of it, but it was them sort of just trying to like keep their own property. But in the long run, they made a pretty decent film out of it. So, hey.
One of the things that really stood out to me in the 1990s remake is how the zombies they weren't Return of the Living Dead zombies. They weren't like super grotesque, but you could tell that they were dead. And there are two zombies in that movie that stick out in my mind as particularly memorable. The cemetery zombie where he's walking and he's walking over his own suit, and you can see the Y incision. But it's one of the zombies Barbara shoots, and it's the zombie Barbara shoots who's holding the baby. And it's just, that's something that I think the original didn't do, because in the original they were ghouls, they were just flesh eaters. Here I got the distinctive feeling these were once, hours ago, these were once people. And that's something, even as a child, really kind of got to me. And even as I've watched the Dead franchise fairly recently, for some reason, I was on a real kick this summer. I must have rewatched the making of Dawn of the Dead a bunch of times, and I've rewatched the movie a few times. And I was just thinking about, there's a speech by one of the scientists from Dawn of the Dead, and he's talking about, these are not our friends, these are not our families, these are pure motorized instinct. But when I thought back to that one zombie that's holding the fake baby, and Barbara's crying and she's pushing it away, and the zombie's not even trying to attack her until she points the revolver in its face and it roars. There's something about that has never quite left me as a creative person, just thinking, what were this person's last moments in life? What led to this zombification that now they're attacking a farmhouse? How did you die? And I know I'm probably looking at this way too far into it, but it's something that I think a remake, when it's done right, it makes you re-examine other pieces of adjacent media and other pieces in that franchise. And I think Savini and that crew did such an exceptional job, where I don't know, and this is probably going to be a very bold statement, I don't think anybody else could remake it and have it have that same level of impact. Because again, that's a very loaded statement that I just handed you. Like, that's like handing you like a gun with like dragon's breath rounds in it. But it's like what Romero said in the 60s said something. What Savini did, it said something too, but it was more emotional. And that's something I did not expect upon re-examination of this movie for this show. And again, I think, Hen, that was a fantastic pick. Like, I remember texting you saying, yo, that's a fucking dope pick. And that's something, like I said, I don't think nearly enough people talk about it. I don't think nearly enough people have seen it. I don't even know if you can stream it anywhere right now.
Oh, no?
Which is a real tragedy. Like, I got my copy through the high seas, we shall say. And it's one of those movies that I do want to own. Like, I want to say Scream Factory put out a really good Blu-ray of this a couple of years ago. Like, I know it is in print somewhere, but I just don't think enough people have seen it or have made it really easily available for people to watch. So
in the States, it's everywhere right now. It's on Tubi, Pluto TV, Peacock, AMC Plus. You can rent it on YouTube. It's on the Roku channel free with ads.
Oh, cool.
So it's out there now. There was a little period where it kind of vanished. But it's been out there for quite a while.
Well, it ain't public domain like the original. So
yeah. Which, so again, fantastic pick. So now that brings us to James. Which one are you going to take us through?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, well, I guess just to get out of my system, I'll talk about the other avenues of thought I had, where like the other movies that didn't make my pick, but came close.
Okay.
Was, first of all, like when it comes to Hammer remake or horror remakes, I think of Hammer. But we did Hammer. Wasn't that like last year?
Yeah.
I was like, wait a minute. We did Hammer already, because a lot of people, it wouldn't be the first thought when it comes to remakes. Would be like, because usually when you think remake, you think of something in the modern era. But Hammer, they were like the ultimate like remake factory. I mean, they were reviving all these classic monsters for a new generation. And they upped the gore, they upped the nudity. They were in color. It basically, like the best way I would explain it is if Universal was NES Hammer was Super Nintendo.
Hell,
So-
I think Hammer was damn near Sega. Like
Yeah.
they had audacity to spare.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, my slogan's always been, it's Hammer time. Because when it comes to best horror remakes, you can't touch this. But
That's clever, James. I love that.
Yes. So then I was thinking of the 80s ones, which I mentioned already. The Thing, The Fly, The Blob. Because you think about what those movies did was that, first of all, it's a 30-year time span from the original. So that's like the perfect gap. That's like a perfect generation where, like, you know, John Carpenter was growing up watching the original Howard Hawks, The Thing. You get that impression. Like, now all those kids are grown up and they're making their own films. And then also they're totally different. They're nothing like the originals. They went completely different, different way with it. And then the level of effects is much higher because you have the 80s effects. They're able to get away with more. They're rated R. There was no ratings back then. So they had a lot more freedom. And each one had something to say on top of that. So that's kind of like a really good example of like how to do a remake. And then also there's sort of like a type of remake where you don't know if it really counts, but it is kind of a remake. Like Evil Dead 2.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah. It is sort of a half remake of the original Evil Dead, which we've also reviewed Evil Dead before, haven't we? So
Yep. Back in 2013, I think we did.
Yeah. So so we already did that. But yeah, that's just an interesting way to go. Like, remake the first movie and then continue it. Like, that's something. And then you think of all those movies where there's a remake, where the Japanese horror films usually, like, or like all Asian horror films in general, like The Ring, The Grudge, Ju-on, and then they'd be remade for like North American audiences, internationally, and they come out like immediately after their Asian counterparts. So basically, they remake it with like a Hollywood cast usually, and it's sort of an idea to, like, I guess, just market it to another audience. So there's those type of remakes, and for better or worse, but yeah.
And I think an example of that, one that is super, super recent, and I didn't realize till I started going down the rabbit hole with this, was Speak No Evil, because that was a remake of a Danish horror movie, I want to say.
Yeah.
And that was with James McAvoy. And the Danish ending, very much fucking different than the North American version. And I don't know. I was with that movie until the ending in the North American version, whereas you're right, like, they want to do it for the North American audiences, and they'll give you some razzle dazzle, and sometimes you get a really good ending, and other times you get whatever that was. But yeah, like, you're right. There's always those two types of remakes where they kind of respect the original and kind of change things, and then you get ones where they remake it for a North American audience.
Well, and then you get the remakes like the Funny Games remake, where it's literally the same director going off the same screenplay, but with an American cast and crew, which I actually really like that Funny Games remake because I'm American, so they set it up for me. I looked at, like, they live in a neighborhood I've seen before. They're the kind of people I've spoken to before, as opposed to in the German one, I have to kind of imagine, I have to use my imagination more. So it made that movie far scarier to me, watching the one with Tim Roth. But overall, which one's the better movie? I don't know. But I definitely connected a little bit more with Funny Games, the American remake.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things I was going to bring up, and I guess now's a good point because we're just about to get into James's pick, but you're talking about things that have changed. I think about horror movie requels and sort of what a reboot can be. And I think about me and David Denoyer, Hen's co-host from Do You Even Movie. We just recently talked about the new Halloween trilogy. And you think about the Rob Zombie movies as well from the Halloween franchise. And James, you and I did a show on that about 10 years ago. And it's interesting to see how much that franchise has changed, because now with the end of the Halloween movies, now Michael is mulch. And what do you do with that now? Like, how do you reboot the Shape now that Jamie Lee Curtis is older? And, as far as I can tell, she's given her the final stamp on the Laurie Strode character. John Carpenter is going to spend the rest of his days playing video games, as far as I understand, which is fine.
And smoking marijuana.
And smoking marijuana. So, we're all going to hang out. But yeah, it's like, what do you do with that franchise now? Like, actually, there's a question I'm going to pose to the panel. Are there certain franchises that probably shouldn't be rebooted and stay gone because there's certain elements that if you rebooted it changes the character too much? And I'm just going to put this thought in your head, because this is where my thought's coming from on this. I want you to think of the Child's Play remake from 2019 versus the Chucky character that exists now. The reason I don't think you could remake Chucky is because the character is so intrinsically tied to Brad Dourif. How do you separate those two? Was Mark Hamill a bad Chucky? No. But if you change the name of that movie, if you took the Child's Play label off of it, I think it would have worked much better. But because you're always going to be associating, well, it's not Brad, you're always going to be comparing the two. Now, counterpoint that with what I just said 20 minutes ago with the new female Pinhead versus Doug Bradley. That remake worked because it was a concept rather than a character. And I know this will eventually get brought up. In fact, I think I asked Hen and David this during the Nightmare on Elm Street podcast. What do you do with a new Freddy? Because Robert's not going to be around forever. And Jackie Earle Haley, not a bad Freddy, bad movie, but what do you do? So, panel, what do you think?
Well, that is the toughest one ever. I was thinking about that like recently too. Like, what are they going to do with Nightmare on Elm Street? It's been a long time since they attempted it, but man, it's like that. I can't think of too many modern horror franchises where the character is so tied together with the actor that, like, how do you do it? I don't know. I do not know the answer to that one.
Because it's different from, say, a Michael Myers or a Jason Voorhees. Like, you can put a Kane Hodder, a Derek Mears, a CJ Miller into the hockey mask. And yes, the physical mannerisms change. That's okay. Even with Michael Myers, it's been like 30 different guys, I swear, at this point.
Even in the original movie, there were 6 people playing him at least. So
yeah. And yeah, it's something that's so hard to do. And with Robert, it's that era of fun menace that makes the character work. Now, I know we've pitched ideas for what a future franchise could look like, but that's a future franchise. And I guess that is a reboot in a sense, but you have to pass the legacy. If you try and remake the franchise, you get what happened in 2010, and nobody was happy with that, because I know the box office on that movie was not great. In fact, I don't know if I've ever told this story on a podcast, but that's the first movie I told an usher to go fuck themselves. So I'm a rude person. I'm sorry now. We were coming out of the theater, and this usher, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, I guarantee you, kid, this was your first job. And the usher walks up to me, so how was your movie? Fuck you. And I just kept walking. And I was so upset. I was like, what did you do to my Freddy?
Oh boy.
It's worth mentioning, Nightmare on Elm Street 2010 was a hit.
It was.
I made $117 million against a $35 million budget. So not a massive hit, but a hit.
Yeah, I did see it. So I
me
guess.
too.
But it feels so weird, because it did make its money clearly, but what happened to a sequel? Like, why didn't people want to see it again?
Well, the response was negative critically from both critics and audiences. So it made money, but I think they knew that no one was going to show up again unless they figured out how to crack that code that they hadn't really cracked that go around. I think with Freddy Krueger in particular, James is completely right. He is Robert Englund. And the only way that you could really, in my opinion, do Nightmare on Elm Street and do Freddy Krueger again is to get a lot of space between the last time we saw Robert Englund be Freddy Krueger and
Goldbergs.
yeah, the Goldbergs. That was a hell of a appearance. But have a lot of space and then try Freddy in a very different way. Maybe, darker, more evil, stay away from the wisecracks, stay away from even the moderate wisecracks, make him a totally different beast. And then maybe if you do that really well, people won't be interested in comparing him to Robert Englund. Because the other reason I think people were, there are a lot of reasons, a lot of problems with Jackie Earle Haley's Freddy Krueger. But the biggest one is that people still wanted Robert Englund, and they were like, why don't we get more Robert Englund? He's still alive. He's still in Hollywood. Put him in the goddamn makeup. That's what we all fucking want. But, now that he's a lot older and there's been a lot of time separating, I think that if and when they do bring Freddy Krueger back, people aren't going to be as ticked off that they're not getting Robert Englund, because they're going to be like, of course Robert Englund's not back. He's old, and hopefully he lives to be 150. That way, we never lose an icon like that. But I do think that, it's so they're so tied together, but at the same time kind of changes all those things. Like, nobody looks at a depiction of Frankenstein and immediately goes like, oh, well, he's no Boris Karloff. Nobody does that anymore because it's been long enough. Yeah. So I don't know. I think Freddy has the power to be a long-standing concept in our culture. I just don't know when we'll be ready to depict him again on screen.
Yeah,
it's tough. Yeah.
I'm hoping we don't have to be that moment when Robert dies plus 20 years. I hope it never comes to that. But yeah, it's interesting to see a character like Freddy as Robert, Chucky as Brad Dourif, yet it's not the same with Doug Bradley and the new Pinhead actress. I find that very, very fascinating, but I guess that's how you approach the characters, because I guess Pinhead is a concept when you really kind of break it down. A Cenobite is a demon that just happens to look like that, and that's the Elliot Spencer representation of it. And I guess, it's interesting. So anyway, tangent over for this one.
Well,
so
real quick, they broke through that issue because they did two films with two different Pinheads.
That's true.
So the fandom had already coped and seethed and got mad and then calmed down and then got bored and watched something else. So they were able to get away with it a little bit easier.
Yeah, we had our little bit of grieving. All right, so James, which one are we going to for your pick?
I guess we'll start with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the 1941 remake. Now, it had only been 10 years since the original, so we do give horror movies a lot of flack for not waiting long enough, but back then it was like rapid fire. But the thing is, you put yourself back in that time period, there was no DVD, there was no internet, obviously no streaming, nothing. You'd see a movie in the theater, and then that was it. You'd leave the theater, you'd probably forget about it, or maybe remember it in some vague recollection. But then 10 years go by, and it's like, hey, there's a new Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, and you go see it again. And the interesting thing about those movies back then, those remakes, is that they would really remake it. It was pretty much literally a remake sometimes. In fact, the first time I ever saw the 1941 version, I was like, what's the point of this? Because it looks just like the original. It's like the exact same. You'd almost swear they use the same script. It's so close. But it's really, really good. And the original was good too. Well, okay. There were many silent versions. But anyway, when I say original, I meant the original sound version with Frederick March. Because that one, it's incredible. I mean, like the acting is so good. But then 1941 comes around, and it has a slow start, and it is like a longer movie than you'd usually see for that time. A lot of horror movies were very short. Like this one's an hour, 50 minutes, which is longer than any of the Universal films. But if you give this one patience and you watch it, it really does ramp up. the acting from Spencer Tracy and Ingrid Bergman is just like amazing. I mean, they're so good. That's really what makes the movie. It takes a different approach with the makeup effects. There isn't really any type of there is a little bit of a change, but it's mostly psychological. So the face just looks more like, it's worn out, and the hair is like falling in front of his face and everything. The original was like, they used these like ultraviolet lights or whatever, these like, I mean UV lights, these black lights or whatever, to make the makeup glow, and it sort of just appears on his face, and it's a really cool effect. But this one just isn't an effect movie. This one's just all in the acting. And what I like about it is that it has this like feeling that it's the embodiment of classic Hollywood, like 1940s. When you think of like Casablanca and stuff like that, this is just like the epitome of that. It just has like this perfect lighting. It just glows. Like you watch this, like you wouldn't think this is a horror film. This is just like a classy, like A plus, movie from that time period. So, yeah, I would even say it's like one of the best 1940s movies in general, like regardless of it being a horror film or whatever.
Now, if it wasn't for you and Henrique, I would not have taken a look at a lot of older horror movies. It's not in my wheelhouse. And I will admit, I was kind of bored during this movie. But that being said, there's something about this movie has a presence that a lot of modern movies do not have. And what I mean by that is, even the music is a character in this. The scenes are a character. And it's something about when the performances are just working together with everything. And I think of one scene in particular that really caught my attention, where Dr. Jekyll is dancing with Beatrice, and she's like, "May I have this dance?" And they're just dancing, and they go outside, and the father gives the guy shit. There's something about that scene I just really, really enjoy. And I said this to my friend Liam when we were watching this. It's amazing how much, I guess because movies with sound were still relatively a novel idea at this time, how much sound played a point in this movie when they go to the opera house, and it's only for just a couple seconds, but how that, again, it comes to life. And just because Citizen Kane had only been a couple of years beforehand, all the wacky editing in this. Yeah.
Same exact year.
Yeah. So I was like, holy shit. Like, oh, wow, look at the floodgates have now been opened in terms of technique has now been done. And again, I'm thinking, wow, I never knew this was a remake until you told me this. And while, like I said, I didn't enjoy this one as much as I enjoyed your next pick, this is my first Spencer Tracy movie ever. And I was like, wow, this guy's kind of a charmer. And my friend Liam was telling me this is him playing against type. And again, it's that I thought was really nice. And Ingrid Bergman.
Oh yeah. Casablanca.
I mean, there's something about actors and actresses from back then. It's just, it feels weird to say out loud, but now that I've been exposed to a lot more types of movies in the last couple of years because of COVID and knowing film dorks like you two, I'm now seeing new things with new eyes, getting new appreciations for things. Cool. Yeah, it's really magical.
One interesting thing I've always thought was like a great example of old Hollywood being exactly the way you'd expect is, before MGM committed to making the remake of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, they bought the rights to the 1939 version from Paramount and then put it in the vault.
31.
Or 31, thank you.
Okay.
They bought it in 39, I think it was. But they bought the 31 version and they literally put it in the vault. They wouldn't license it for screenings. They wouldn't let anyone get access to it. It was considered lost until the 60s or 70s when they finally let it be screened again and stuff, because they were like, we don't want this to steal the fire of our super high budget Victor Fleming movie, because they'd had the two gigantic hits of his with Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz, right? I believe those were his.
Oh, 39. Yeah, both those came out 39. Yeah.
Yeah, so they were protecting their investment by just completely skirting and hiding away a film that had like won an Oscar, right? I think
it did. It was like
one, yeah.
It was probably, that's a good point. It was probably the first horror film to win any Oscar. I'd like to double check it, but I think it was the acting for Frederick March. Actually, he won the actor. Here, let's confirm it real quick.
Okay.
But
yeah, like
yeah. So yeah, go ahead.
No, I was about to say, like, it's something so incredible to be exposed to stuff like this. Again, as someone who, I mean, we're all relatively close in the same age. Like, I just turned 43 this past weekend, and just never seen these types of movies. Like I grew up with my grandparents. They were in their 50s and 60s when they were raising me in the 1980s. So this was definitely in their era of their childhood. And they would never watch stuff like this. I mean, my dad used to watch like Westerns and stuff like that, but I'd never seen old classic golden Hollywood until I got a little bit older, when I started going to high school. And then when I started hanging out with like kind of YouTube, like, hey, check this out. Like, all right, sure. And I don't know, it's so different from me. And just cause like, I'm used to the high action, high octane ridiculousness of the 1980s and into the 90s. This is just a completely different style of filmmaking for me, a different speed. And while I'm not as well versed as you guys when it comes to knowing all this stuff, I mean, ask me to name a gun from that movie. Yeah, sure, no problem. I got you there. But who won the Oscar? Fuck, I don't know.
Yeah, so it was the Oscar for Best Actor in a Leading Role, Frederick March, Jekyll and Hyde.
Damn. That's awesome.
Yeah, I would highly recommend that one too. In my mind, I can't decide which one is better. Spencer Tracy and Frederick March, they're both so good in their own ways. Frederick March uses a lot more makeup in the role, so there's like, if you want a little more of a monster, you get that in that movie. But I mean, they're both really disturbing though. They're like really dark films. And actually, come to think of it, Spencer Tracy and Frederick March were both together in Inherit the Wind, which was another Stanley Kramer film, who's one of my favorite directors.
I love that movie.
Yeah.
Now, has Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, what are some of the more modern examples of this?
That's a good question. I mean, Hammer gave it a few shots. There were two Hammer films. The first was Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll, which is kind of forgettable. But then Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde was actually really interesting. Yeah, that's a good one with Ralph Bates. But past that, I'm not sure, because they don't really do a lot of that off the top of my head.
I think there was one in 2002.
Okay.
In the UK.
Okay.
I just like popped into my head. But it had David Warner in it. Yeah.
Oh, that's got my attention. I love David Warner. Yeah, like I don't know. Because I was saying to my friend Liam, I'm like, why hasn't this been done again? Because we just got the Invisible Man like a couple of years ago. We're getting the Wolfman next month, or not next month. I think in January. Mm-hmm. I want to say.
Well, I'm kind of surprised. They've never done the Invisible Man since the original 1933 film. Because like the recent one, which was really good, by the way, but it was like it wasn't the Invisible Man at all. It was like completely unrelated, except for the title. Mm-hmm. But there's so many aspects in that book that I'm so surprised that they have never remade it and expanded upon it, because there's so much more in the book that they didn't do in the original film. Mm-hmm. And you would just think, like, after all these years, like, I just get the weird feeling that it's sort of like a Friday the 13th situation where like the rights are tied up somehow. Like, I don't know, but they just have never done that story since. There was a TV version. There was a UK BBC TV version, I think. But that might have been The only other time, because even Hammer didn't Hammer didn't even touch the Invisible Man. So
that may have been because of the difficulty of the effects too at that time. Never know. I don't know.
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. So so that'll be James's pick. So coming into our last picks here on the show here, we're gonna revisit one of mine, and this one was remake with aspects of the original, but taking the setting and then just adding demons to it. This would be the Evil Dead remake with Freddy Alvarez back in 2013. And this is a remake where I've got a weird history with it. So I remember seeing this in theaters back in 2013. I want to say it was the April of that year. And I didn't like it at first. And then it came to streaming, and I remember being really sick and being stuck in bed for like 2 weeks. And I remember just watching this movie a couple of different times, because clearly I'm a sadist. And I remember this movie just kind of growing on me over time. And its story, not too dissimilar from Hellraiser, where there's someone with a substance abuse issue dealing with difficulties. Their friends and family take them out to the woods so they can, recover, be with a support system that's going to help them. And it's just one of those things where I'm like, okay, the idea kind of works. And they never outright name the book the Necronomicon. They name it something else. The Deadites are never explicitly named, but they say if 5 souls are consumed, the abomination comes to life or something like that. And you just see people get picked off one by one. But what really stuck with me was how the original Evil Dead it was over the top in violence. This one took it to a level of not hostile levels of sadistic, but it was cruel. And that's what I kind of like about it. And I know that makes me sound like I should be on a watch list somewhere, but the kill that sticks with me is the one girl, she gets possessed by the demon, and she stops dead in the bathroom and she pisses her pants. And that's not what gets me. There's a scene where she's on the floor, she turns around and she takes a piece of like shattered glass or like something, and she carves a smile in her face. And not gonna lie, that just shook me in a way I can't even begin to describe. I was like, whoa, it unsettled me. And then the movie would take aspects of the original Evil Dead with like the chainsaw, Dead by Dawn, and there's just this relentless evil. It's gonna get you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And it didn't have to rely on an Ash Williams. It didn't have to rely on a MacGuffin of the Necronomicon. It just had to be in the woods. There had to be a tree demon rape scene sort of thing. And it just had to be fucked up. And I think that's in the idea where it's almost a remake in name only with like things that are cherry picked. I was very pleasantly surprised by how well this actually worked.
Yeah, when it came to the Evil Dead remake for me, I also didn't like it as much the first time I saw it. But upon I watched it again when the unrated version came out a few years later, and I really got a kick out of it. And I have to say that at this time, Fede Alvarez is becoming one of my favorite directors because, my God, he keeps that insane berserk energy in every film he goes into. What was it? Don't Breathe was incredibly crazy.
Yeah.
Loved that film. And I really liked Alien Romulus. I liked that every time I thought it was over, it got crazier and crazier. I think he has a real knack for making just like really kinetically wild films. And I think Evil Dead was, the perfect example of what he was capable of. I think the characters work. I think they're relatable. So, and I think the setting worked really well. I definitely think, it doesn't help to compare it to the original Evil Dead, but the original Evil Dead is one of those perfect mixes that doesn't make any sense. It was cheap. They were all unknown. The effects were really rudimentary, and it completely and utterly worked. you can't just do that on purpose. It has to kind of, there's a little bit of fairy dust that has to fall into it. But I think the Evil Dead remake really kind of, I think it really made something special.
Yeah, because like it didn't have to steal what made the 81 so memorable, because it couldn't. It made it its own identity, and it just, like I said, it worked on a level I never thought it was going to. And like it opens up and it shocks you with like all the dead cats swinging, the sacrifice and everything, and even how the movie ends. If I did have one knock against it, the post-credit scene was so unnecessary to tie it to the original, but I get it. If you're going to have an Evil Dead thing, Bruce Campbell's got to get his paycheck somehow. So, you know what? I'm fine with it, sure. But I was like, my only knock against it. And then even the sequel, Evil Dead Rise, that came out last year, I want to say, was a pleasant surprise too. And it's nice to see some life being injected back into the Evil Dead franchise, since Ash versus Evil Dead didn't give us the fourth season that we all wanted. The video game was underwhelming, if somewhat fun. It's just, it's a franchise that I think can continue on, and I know it has a very strong legacy in comics, which are a lot of fun, and a lot of weird crossovers there where he's fighting Freddy, Jason, Chucky. I think even Hack Slash he teams up with at like one point. So there's a lot of cool life left in that franchise, but to see it on screen being portrayed so well, because like I said, Fede Alvarez has just this incredible power and energy and drive, because Alien Romulus, this is going to be, I don't think I've shared this opinion on the show just yet. Everybody who knows me from social media knows Aliens and RoboCop are my holy scripture.
You've reminded me that I need to see Alien Romulus, because I was when that kick, a lot of times like certain movies, when they come out in the theater, if I don't see it the opening weekend, then I just forget, and then I don't know when it comes out like on streaming. And I was actually in Toronto when it came out. I was playing a show. But yeah, so I missed Romulus.
Oh,
but,
dude,
but
like when I say it came within a pubic hair of dethroning Aliens for me, that is how good it is.
Oh, wow.
That's how much I fucking loved it. Now, I went on a holy mission to get the popcorn tin for this thing. Like, I literally drove in the fucking rain to get this thing. And my home city of Guelph only got 5 for a city of 150,000. I would have beaten a bus full of nuns to get this thing. So I very proudly have my own xenomorph head that I use for my alien role-playing game, Dice now. But still, it was totally worth it. I was so surprised that Alien is a property to even talk about reboots and requels. You talk about Prometheus and Covenant, which are prequels to that franchise. Romulus does enough to respect what happened in those without laying it onto it too thick. And it even, this surprised me, and then we'll move on to something else. It even respects the role-playing game material. You never see that level of synergy. Like, there was enough high-level meetings where everybody was on the right page. And with Fede, I feel completely, if he wants to do another one of these movies, by all means, sir, I can only get so hard. Please make another one of these movies. I'm so happy with you. Give me something fun. If I could get something set after Alien Resurrection, I would be so on board with that, because you could still have Sigourney Weaver if she wanted to come back and do something. If they wanted to do the Halloween 2018 treatment, if we could get old Ripley, why the hell not? I'll take it. Hell,
yeah, I would too.
Yeah, like Winona Ryder could even come back and play Call. That'd be fun. So anyway, yeah, like I think, again, just my concluding thought on this is Evil Dead worked, and I don't know if you would ever need to remake it again, because each Evil Dead 80 stands on its own. Evil Dead 2013 stands on its own. Do we need Evil Dead 2042? I don't know. Maybe if the family shows up. But still, 5 people in the audience got that. Anyway, Yeah, so those are my thoughts. So I guess we'll go to Hen. What is your next pick?
Oh well,
sorry, James.
Please.
I didn't
Yes.
go to. I didn't talk about Evil Dead yet.
Yeah,
but,
yeah, sorry.
I mean, you don't. You could skip me though on this if you
No,
want,
no.
because I'm just gonna piss on everybody's parade anyway. So
Oh, no,
just-
no,
Do it.
Piss.
That's the best
Nah,
part.
it's all right.
Piss in my face.
All right, okay. So, of course, we're talking about a movie that came out 11 years ago. I saw it once. You guys even said that you saw it multiple times, so maybe it does get better. And you have inspired me to see it again, give it another shot. And you know what? I did like certain things about it. It definitely delivered on the gore, especially in the end. The end was like bloody as fuck. Like I mean, pretty much everything was red in that last scene. I liked all that. And I didn't think it was a bad movie either, but I think for some of the things you pointed out that it just didn't feel like Evil Dead, or it cherry picked certain things from the franchise, but it wasn't really, and like, okay, it didn't have the comedy, but to be fair, it was more of a remake of the first movie, which was a little more serious. What I didn't like was the idea that it existed, because at the time that movie came out, I didn't know who was asking for an Evil Dead remake. We were waiting for a sequel. We were waiting for the follow-up to Army of Darkness, like all these years. And, there's been some talk about it here and there. Then all of a sudden they come out with a remake, and it's like, hey, yeah, you're getting a remake whether you like it or not. It's like, well, we wanted the sequel. What's the deal? And we did eventually get the show Ash versus Evil Dead, and that was great. I mean, I still would have preferred it as a film format, but I'm not complaining because you gave us more. You gave us more with the TV show than we ever even asked for. So it was a very nice treat to the fans. The remake, I just didn't really understand what the point of it was. And even with Evil Dead Rises, I was like, it doesn't feel like an Evil Dead film to me, because I think it needs the comedy. And I've come to realize that there are two camps of fans, where like some don't like the comedy aspect, or even say that Evil Dead 2 like ruined the franchise and everything.
I
So
wouldn't
it's
go that far. Personally,
yeah.
I mean,
yeah. It's two lines of thoughts. Like, okay, I understand like liking something to be more serious, but we've already had so many serious zombie and possession films. Like, what makes Evil Dead unique to me as a franchise is the comedy aspect. And also going back to the thought of like how closely a film franchise is identified with its character is, like there's no Ash equivalent in any of those films.
No,
And
not at all.
And I don't expect Bruce Campbell to keep doing this anymore, but like you need somebody else to fill that type of role. And there isn't any character that's as charismatic as that. So I think Evil Dead is really about that character, having that like that protagonist, that anti-hero, because he's he's kind of a jackass, right? Like he's a hero you love, but he's also kind of a stooge.
Deeply reluctant hero.
Yeah, like he's a moron who happens to save the day, because when you break it down, the Evil Dead franchise, it is Ash. I mean, like you said, there's any number of serious possession or zombie movies. There's been so many horror movies. Oh, you touch this evil relic and the evil shall be unleashed from beyond thy gates of hell. Okay, cool, but you need someone who's going to fall on a banana peel and it's going to be funny, and he might accidentally cut his hand off. Yeah, like, I don't know. You're right. That's interesting to look at the Evil Dead franchise through that kind of lens, because Evil Dead 2013 does have a few moments of levity. Even Evil Dead Rise has a few moments of levity, but it puts the gas on so much that it's cruelty and spectacle, but it's not Evil Dead. Even the cameo where they find the Necronomicon in the basement and it's Bruce Campbell's voice on the tape recorder. Okay, that's a cool Easter egg, but it's not advancing the lore of Evil Dead. Like, what does the next Evil Dead franchise have to do? Because now the Evil Deadites are out in the world. And I guess it's just taking the name and the basic idea of the franchise and slapping it on some other new director's vision, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But unless you have that spark of life, that Bruce Campbell-ness to it, it's Evil Dead in name only, I guess. Wow, I never quite thought of it like that. So thank you for pissing in my face. It tastes a little bit like Arnold Palmer. So
well, I will say, if you get a chance, check out the unrated one, especially if you enjoyed the effects quite a bit. That's a great way to revisit it and get a little extra and see what you think of it now. Because I'm not like a devoted lover of it, but I was kind of a detractor until I rewatched it. And now I can appreciate it a bit more. So might be worth a shot. Maybe we were in the same fan headspace when we all watched it that first go.
Like. So watch the unrated version next time.
Yeah, I think you'll have a good time with it.
So, cool. Hen, your second pick was one I was unfamiliar with until Dave threw it at me this year when we covered it on our Loose Cannon show. But I know you worship at the altar of this movie. So please welcome me to church right now.
Oh my gosh. I have always had a soft spot for Body Snatchers from 1993, directed by Abel Ferrara. That is just a phenomenal retelling of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. But the thing that I've always loved about it, aside from the excellent performances by Forrest Whitaker and Arlie Ermey and a few other people that oh gosh, I should have just written them down. But there were a lot of incredible performances in it, a lot of truly chilling moments, like when Meg Tilly gives the whole speech about where are you going to run? Where are you going to hide? Nowhere, because there's no one like you left. I get chills when I think about those sequences, and they're not even big special effects moments. There are some great special effects moments when we see the Body Snatchers transforming. But what I remember is Meg Tilly in her nightgown, just saying that and making me feel terrified. And the thing that they did that I thought was so brilliant was setting it on a military base. Because the concept of Invasion of the Body Snatchers and the concept of fighting against the Body Snatchers is fighting against the homogeny of human thought, fighting for individuality, individual rights, dare I say, the things that make America great, which is, definitely when the original stories were told, that was a lot of what they were talking about. We had to worry about the big red menace, so with that element in mind, they then turn it on its ear and say, okay, but let's set this in the place in American life where you have to be the most conformist ever, the military. So now you're in a military housing area, and everybody's supposed to follow orders, do as they're told, dress the same. How quickly would you even realize something was wrong? And that is what makes me friggin' love it. And the scene. The other scene I love so much is Forrest Whitaker's character just goes completely insane and is just popping what I can only assume are amphetamines so that he won't fall asleep so they can't take him. He gives this incredible speech about protecting the individual. I friggin' love this movie, even though the ending totally whiffs. The ending is not good. It's clearly tacked on by the studio. The movie itself is so good, I just forgive the ending entirely. That's my big thought on Body Snatchers.
When I saw this, Dave had introduced me, I think not long after you guys had done something on one of your podcasts about it. And I was like, okay, I'm curious. And I was like, you know what? Because I just seen the one from 1977 and I loved that. I was so impressed with it. And that's another horror movie remake we could have easily touched on tonight, and we didn't. But this one, again, it was 90s. But you're right, setting it on a military base, how quickly would you catch on to that? And just the performances by the kids in it, and just, again, it worked on so many different levels that I was really, really impressed with it. And I haven't seen a whole lot of Forrest Whitaker movies either. And again, really like him. Like, I mostly know him from Ghost Dog and Saw Gerrera from Star Wars. So to see him in something else this early on in his career, that's pretty kick-ass. I thoroughly enjoyed that too. But I remember when I edited the podcast for the episode that me and Dave did on this earlier this year, I took that line from Meg Tilly, where are you going to run? Where are you going to hide? That is such a slapper of an ending. It's so good. Now, I wish the visuals would match that, but just that little bit of just special sauce. It's just enough to make this an underappreciated classic, because I remember the video advertisements for this. I remember this being advertised in my small town on radio, on television. I remember seeing posters for this at the drive-in. I remember this having a fairly significant multimedia campaign for its time, but nobody talks about it.
Yeah, it was
I was
very
really surprised
underloved.
Yeah. I think it's really cool that you picked this one, because I haven't heard anybody talk about this one in so long. Like I actually forgot this movie existed for the longest time, and I remember. This is probably the last time I seen it. Actually, was in 2009. I did a series of videos about alien invader movies from the 50s, because I'm like really big on all those 50s alien invader movies, and it would basically take the original and then compare it with the remake. So I'd go through everything. It would be like because there was like a new Day the Earth Stood Still at the time, and I think that kind of kicked it off, where I'm like, I'm just going to go through all these movies. So I did The Thing, I did War of the Worlds, and you know how much work it is doing like a video where it's like, you're writing it, or you first you got to watch all the movies, then you're writing it, then you're voicing it, you're editing it. And as I'm going through this process, which is just going like weeks and weeks and weeks, like over time, I keep discovering more of these movies. So I already know I'm doing Invasion of the Body Snatchers and then the 77 remake. And then I'm like, wait a minute. There's a 93 version also. Okay, it stars Arlie Ermy. It's set on an army base. Sign me up. Okay, here we go. And so I had to fit that in there. And then there was actually a fourth one too. There's The Invasion with Daniel Craig, and I think Nicole Kidman is in that one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I ended up having to do all those. But what I remember about this one, because I unfortunately I remember very little right now, but I do remember it takes a while to get really good, but like halfway in, like maybe 45 minutes or so, it starts to get real good. And also the way they explain how the aliens, the pod people take over the bodies is much better than before, because that aspect was kind of lacking before, like especially in the original. It's very vague, very unclear, but in this one they have these tentacles crawling into their noses and everything, and it's so gross. So I think that whole aspect was pretty cool.
Well, and if you haven't had a chance to see to see Body Snatchers 93 on the new Blu-ray that Warner Archive put out, definitely grab yourself it, because they finally released it in the 2:35 aspect ratio. And Bohan Bazeli was the cinematographer on it. He did a ton of great films. And his cinematography on it is top notch. Like every single shot, you could tell Abel Ferrara and he were like nerding out to try and get the most out of everything.
Oh, wow. That's always cool when they do that, because then you're literally like seeing more of the movie on the sides. You're like, oh my God, wait a minute. I'd never noticed that before. Holy shit.
Yeah, definitely.
That's something that I've learned from listening to Hen and Dave do on their podcast, is not just watch the movie for what's being presented as a story, but watch the movie, see what different cinematographers have done. If I've learned anything from those two, is everybody crosses path on Freddy's Nightmares and Tales from the Crypt, or what's the other show?
Falcon Crest. Everybody worked on Falcon Crest in the 80s. Every man, woman, and child in America appeared on Falcon Crest at some point, apparently.
Oh man. But yeah, like it's so interesting just to see when a director and the crew are working in synergy, whether the movie's a box office success or not. you really get something special. And I think when you get the right teams behind these remakes, reboots, and reimaginings, you really do get something special. Like that's something I'd mentioned to Dave when we did the Halloween special that was on the site last week. I used to have a really low opinion of those movies, and now I've started to come around, even on Halloween Ends, where I still hate the fucking ending to it, but I'm starting to see it through different eyes now. When everybody has an idea on what they want to portray on the screen, you really do get something really, really interesting. So for our final pick this evening, James, bring us home, buddy. Where are we going now?
Oh yeah, well, House of Wax, 1953. So that's actually a remake of the 1933 movie Mystery of the Wax Museum. And Mystery of the Wax Museum was actually one of the rare color horror films from the 30s. But it was done with the two-strip Technicolor process. So it's that weird color. Have you ever seen any movies with that? Because it's a really strange looking color. But
yeah, there was something about this movie where I can't quite put my finger on it, but it was very mesmerizing in how it was shot. It was color graded in a way I've never quite seen. Like the colors popped in a very unique way.
So by the time they got to 1953, they had the three-strip process, so it looked way better. But it was shot in 3D. It was one of the first 3D movies ever. So that's kind of the big difference between them, because usually it's like, okay, black and white, then color, and this one's color and then color 3D.
And that's why there's that sequence with that guy with the paddle ball.
Yes. Yep. So that paddle ball scene was in there totally just because this was a new gimmick. And for some reason, it's like one of the most memorable scenes is this guy just hitting this paddle ball toward the screen. And, it has nothing to do with any of the plot, but it's just one of those things that sticks with you.
Well, when I first saw this film, it was actually a friend brought it over because I had just bought a ViewSonic video projector that did 3D.
Oh yeah.
So I got the special at home 3D glasses and we put it up on a 120-inch screen, and the 3D was exquisite.
Was it? Oh, great.
Oh, it was so good. Not just the paddle balls and the dancing girls either. The face reveals and stuff were very startling because of the level of depth you got through the screen. It was the best way to ever see that movie for the first time.
Oh, cool. I did watch it because I have the 3D Blu-ray, and I remember thinking that the 3D just looked okay, but you never know. It could be like my setup, because I do know that can look really good, because I saw Creature from the Black Lagoon at home on 3D one time that just looked incredible. So no, that's cool. That's good to hear that was working out. So in this movie, I think, the opening sequence is fantastic. So it starts out, so Vincent Price plays the sculptor, and he has this wax figure collection that he's been making, and he's trying to get it sold to like this museum, and he has a partner there who decides he's just going to burn the place down and collect the insurance money. So and he just flips the fuck out on him, and it turns out that they think he's dead in the fire, but he comes back and his face is disfigured, but he somehow is able to craft this perfect like face mask over himself, which makes no sense at all. But which is in the original as well. And even in the original, there's a really great scene where like she's hitting his face and like it cracks off, so you get that great reveal. So then he ends up going on this big killing spree, dipping people in wax. And then I guess because now his hands are disfigured, he can't craft the wax sculptures as much. So he has to like do it the quicker way, which is by killing people. Again, it doesn't make a lot of sense. The plot just is very questionable. But that first scene when the fire's going and all those wax figures are melting, That's just like one of the greatest openings to like any horror film, but it definitely never gets to that level of energy the rest of the movie. But still, it's like you know, it made Vincent Price into a star. I mean, he did a lot of movies before that, but this one kind of really put him into the horror spectrum. Being one of the first 3D movies, and like you said, had a great color scheme. Like it's just a very colorful movie, very appealing to the eyes. And yeah, that's about all I can say. Just a really, great classic film there.
This is my first Vincent Price movie, and
Man.
Yeah, this was such a treat because I was watching these in preparation with my friend Liam, and he's another horror movie aficionado. And I remember just looking over at him and saying, there's something about Vincent Price's presence on screen. It's so magnetic. You're just drawn to him every time he speaks. And then when he pointed out Igor was like a young Charles Bronson, I'm like, the Death Wish guy? He's like, why, yes, it
Charles
is.
Bronson is Igor.
He's a baby. He's a baby in it.
I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like, it was just such a treat for me. But again, with what we saw in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, music is a character in this. And again, it sucks me right in. And this movie kept me going the entire time. And I remember, and this I didn't expect, 100% no bullshit right now, when his face mask cracks and it reveals that this is underneath, I was like, God, it actually startled me. I'm like, that's fucking cool. Like, for 1953, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And again, there's just something so magically, and I know I'm saying that word a lot, but it really demonstrates to me the talent, the commitment, and the love when people like you and Hen put stuff to film. It's something I know I can't do, but when I see people do that, like it blows me away just to see creative people being able to express themselves like this and to create something so entertaining at a time when the medium was really coming into its own. Like, there's obviously classic movies from, the early 1900s and obviously now, but again, just to see a genre that I love come up and be elevated and have a movie be just as entertaining today in 2024 as it was in 1953. That is frankly fucking cool. I'm so happy to be exposed to stuff like this. I remember when you showed me the Hammer horror movies, how much I dug those.
Oh, cool.
And the Universal movies from a couple of years ago from the 1930s and 40s, how much I really, really dig those.
Yeah.
It's something about a remake like this. It knows its audience. It doesn't waste your time. Even the paddle ball guy, when he's like, I'm going to knock the popcorn right out of your mouth. Come right this way, motherfucker. Yeah. And he's just doing his thing. I was like so enthralled by it. And again, maybe you could just jingle keys in front of my face and I'm going to be entertained. But again, it's cool to see commitment and love put onto a screen and to still have it endure 60 years later. That shows to me it's a timeless masterpiece.
Yeah. It sounds like you got to see more Vincent Price.
I really do.
Yeah, I actually just did a full deep dive into all of the Roger Corman Poe films. So because this month on Monster Madness, we're paying tribute to Roger Corman, who we lost this year. And so I'm kind of doing a whole bunch of Roger Corman movies, like older and newer ones. Like I'm doing, I just did old ones like A Bucket of Blood, It Conquered the World, and then newer ones like Carnosaur and Piranha. But I did one of the Poe films. I couldn't decide which Poe film to do because he directed 8 of them. So, and 7 of those have Vincent Price. So I'm like, well, which one do I pick? I'm like, I got to do them all. So it's like that one installment is like pushing 40 minutes long. And I basically just whipped through all the Poe movies. But yeah, if you want to see like his acting, like in those movies, he's really good. And actually, if I were to pick one Vincent Price thing, like I would say an evening of Edgar Allan Poe. It's basically like a made-for-TV thing he did. He's the only actor in it. It's just him doing these monologues from the books. It's not Roger Corman, but I mentioned it in there because I had to. And it's just him like acting his ass off. Like the first segment is a Telltale Heart, and I mean it's basically him just performing the book, but man, it is incredible.
I love it. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, guys, we've taken a look at some fantastic horror movie remakes, reimaginings, and reboots that work for one reason or another. And we've talked about some stuff that doesn't necessarily work. And we've also talked about people urinating in my face.
Well,
so
before you finish that thought, let's not forget the House of Wax remake from 2005.
There you go.
Yes,
there you go.
yes.
I was like, when is that going to get mentioned?
Yeah.
Woof.
Now that's a movie. I can't remember what I was doing, but I was researching that for this show. And I remember it was part of the marketing specifically. Like, you want to see Paris Hilton die? Well, pay $8 and come to your local multiplex and see this happen. And that was part of internal documents to make people go to see it. And I'm thinking, that's clever, fucked up, but clever.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And in the film, spoiler, but the house turns out to be entirely made of wax. So when it catches on fire, the whole house starts melting and falling apart. So it's literally a house of wax.
I did not know that. Wow.
It's fun for what it is. It's like the absolute worst, best part of every bad 2000 era horror movie. It's got the stunt casting of people like Paris Hilton. It really doesn't follow the original House of Wax concept at all. It's more like Tourist Trap than House of Wax.
Oh, okay.
And then the goddamn house is made of wax. And the first time I watched it, I just remembered thinking, I guess it's never sunny where they live because
yeah, right.
There's not even rebar. The place is just bending and falling.
Wow. Was that a Platinum Dunes movie?
I think it probably has. By law,
wasn't there like there was like a period of like an era where there was like a horror remake like every
couple months almost.
Yeah, it seemed like, and they did a lot of William Castle movies, like a lot of stuff like that. But yeah,
because there was like Texas Chainsaw, I Spit on Your Grave, The Hills Have Eyes, My Bloody Valentine. There's got to be some that I'm missing.
House on Haunted Hill got a remake around that time.
Yeah.
13 Ghosts.
Yeah.
A lot of really good ones. Oh, by the way, the House of Wax 2005 remake was a Dark Castle film.
Dark Castle, okay.
Yeah. Joel Silver got his cocaine money out of that film. That's for sure.
Oh, okay. So Dark Castle was basically the William Castle remakes because it branched off from Platinum Dunes. Is that correct?
Let's see. No, this was actually founded by Joel Silver, Bob Zemeckis from Back to the Future, and Gilbert Adler from Tales from the Crypt. But they said that the name paid homage to William Castle, and they did do House on Haunted Hill and 13 Ghosts. So before moving on to a bunch of other stuff.
Mm-hmm. There we go. A little bit of trivia to close out the show.
Yeah.
So, guys, if we want to keep up with our horror host friends here, Hen, where would they have to go to find the most handsome man on the interwebs?
Well, it just so happens the website is incrediblyhandsome.com. That's where you can find out information about my podcasts, my Tubi show. Really, anything you could ever want to know about me is at incrediblyhandsome.com. And if you're listening to this and there's still some spooky season left, my podcast, Weekly Spooky, will be releasing scary content every day in October. So please give me some love for having not slept for an entire month.
It's true, guys. Go over there. They have full podcast novellas. You can find the Strickland Files over there. I have a couple of stories. I should have one for Christmas later on this year and some other cool stuff. So once again, go check out incrediblyhandsome.com. James, like there's any reason to go with you. There's Cinemassacre.com. You type your name into YouTube. You are everywhere, my friend. But are you going to be making any public appearances before the end of 2024?
Before the end, no, I'm just finishing up a big Christmas episode by then. But Halloween is first, and the nerd is basically going to review, or probably already by the time you're listening, reviewing the Nosferatu game on Super Nintendo in time for the Nosferatu remake, just in time for Halloween. Oh wait, fuck! It's coming out on fucking Christmas.
Because synergy, am I right? Yeah. So guys, once again, thank you once again for joining us here on thisweekingeek.net. Next year on the show, I'm going to pitch this live right here, right now. I think next year we should pay homage to people like us and talk about horror hosts. What do you guys think?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
Hell yeah.
So next year it'll be Sven Gulli, Elvira.
You want to do it next year? Yeah, let's do it.
So,
I'm down.
So that will be fun. We'll be talking about that. And once again, guys, please keep it locked to thisweekingeek.net as me and Alex continue our sprint towards the end of the year. We still have a couple more spooky bits of content before the end of the year. I know me and Ken and David Denoyer will be talking about the video game movies you've never heard of, the Dead Rising movies exclusive to Crackle. What the fuck? We're also going to be talking about some other crazy stuff, and we're going to be doing lots of stuff as we continue through Broketober and the sprint towards the holiday season, which ends in our year-end Video Game Awards show that will be airing later on in December. So for This Week in Geek, we have been from the great lands of Ohio. We have been
Henrique Couto.
From the wonderful world of angry video gameness,
James Rolfe.
And I've been Mike the Birdman saying, have a safe and happy Halloween. I'm literally putting up my Christmas tree right now. You motherfuckers can't stop me. We'll see you soon. Right here on thisweekingeek.net. I'm not kidding. Watch my social media.
At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.
Thanks for listening to this episode of This Week in Geek. Hungry for more? Check out our website at thisweekingeek.net. You can subscribe to the podcast, browse our Twitter and Instagram, and leave your thoughts on today's topics. If you'd like to give us some feedback, send us an email at feedback@thisweekingeek.net. Tune in next time, and remember,
lower your shields and surrender your listenership.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.